there's a whole bunch of different things inside of Iran that we can still hit on the infrastructure side to cause them economic pain.
It's Michael Allen with Beacon Global Strategies. Today I'm joined by Roger Zakheim of the Ronald Reagan Foundation and Rich Goldberg of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Both of them are experts in Iran with longtime service across the executive branch and in the Congress. We are going to discuss the blockade of Iranian ports by the United States Navy. We're also going to talk to the diplomatic path that led us to Islamabad in negotiations with the Iranians over the weekend, and we'll discuss the prospect for a diplomatic agreement down the road. Stay with us as we go to Rich Goldberg and Roger Zakheim. Roger Zakheim and Rich Goldberg, welcome back to NatSec Matters.
Great to be here.
It's an honor to be back.
Well, I've had you two separately, but I thought it would make sense today in the wake of momentous events of late in Iran and with regard to the negotiations in Pakistan to have you both on to get your takes on how things are going so far. So let me start just trying to set what I think the stage is here. I thought yesterday when I saw the initial news that we were blockading the entire Strait. And I think people ran with that, thought it might not make a ton of sense. But by the time CENTCOM came out with their statement, I think they clarified it by saying we're going to blockade Iranian ports. Do I have that distinction right, or is that some kind of distinction without a difference? Rich, why don't you start?
No, I think that's correct. I mean, obviously, the question would be, would you be denying the exit of a China-bound tanker from Saudi Arabia through the Strait of Hormuz? Or would you be focusing only on all the ghost tankers, all the ghost fleets coming out of Karg Island through the Strait of Hormuz, and or any other ships that would be coming out of Jask or somewhere else on the other side of the Strait of Hormuz? And then also, what are you going to do with any of the cargo vessels coming into Iran, whether or not they're transiting Strait of Hormuz? That could be for a range of imports. Remember, this regime is now actually, once again, heavily dependent on imports of gasoline. It's something that's not talked about a lot, but something that emerged last year before the protests. But also food, other materials that will be important for the economy, massive pressure on inflation potentially immediately. And then, of course, if the Chinese are trying to move any sort of material in by sea, we know that they've moved seaborne cargo ships filled with precursor chemicals for fuel, for the solid fuel missiles, components before by sea as well. So making that distinction is important for the market. Mm-hmm. And then when you actually look at the fact that we had this weekend transit of two destroyers moving through the Strait of Hormuz, now setting up a safe passage sea lane for commercial shipping, doing the actual work of showing the shipping community, hey, if we can, you can, here's how you go back and forth safely, and doing any mining mapping, detection, and neutralization along the way, I think that puts into perspective what the mission is here.
Yeah, okay. Roger, do you agree, and also drawing upon your DOD background, your House Armed Services Committee background, do you think the Navy is about ready to begin an escort mission, or do you think that's not really in the cards?
Well, I agree with Rich's explanation of why really it's about Iranian ports, and yeah, it's a distinction with a difference, Michael, for the markets in terms of actually just the Navy mission alone. And of course, it's where it makes sense, makes the most sense, right? We are finally applying this economic pressure on the Iranians. I mean, the choke point now is choking the Iranians. It's the way it should have always been. And that's what we're seeing right now. In terms of what happens next, I mean, I view this, I always viewed that President Trump was operating kind of with two parallel track. On one side, he was doing the diplomacy perhaps to pacify voices within his own administration, the Congress. But the whole time, the military was prepping the battlefield to carry out the blockade that we're seeing right now, and potentially to do an escort mission or the forced opening of the straits if that's required. And I think that's the question. Here we are at the time of this recording, Michael, and I spent a number of hours you have vessels that are transiting, and the Iranians have not, as far as I understand, challenged it at all, either through the fast boats or drones or any other weapon at their disposal. They're deterred for the moment. They haven't felt the pain just yet. But I fully expect, and maybe this is where we want to go in the conversation, that President Trump would love nothing more than the Iranians to yield and open up the Straits through this blockade strategy. Mm-hmm. But I think we all know that this regime is probably going to fire first, and they're going to have to be taught a lesson through military action to open it up.
And I just want to jump in because I think it was an important point Roger made of, we've been waiting for this. This is the obvious play to many of us, our strength versus their vulnerability, putting the pressure on them rather than putting the pressure on us. Why did this take 6 weeks to develop? I think the sequencing is important here. If you roll in the way you did to Venezuela with a very different threat in front of you and a different calculation in front of you, and you say, hey, we're here to impose a blockade now, give up your nuclear program, give up all your missiles, give up your drones, give up your Navy, give up your air defense. The Iranians under Khomeini were never going to do that. In fact, what you could have had happen is the response be, oh, you want to play with our oil? No problem, we're going to light up the Gulf. And then they would just start doing everything they've been doing for the last 6 weeks in response to the blockade. Now you can't enforce a blockade. Now all your naval assets, if you've positioned yourself correctly, even if hopefully you've actually moved all your force posture in to be ready for what's coming at you, now you're responding to the Iranians, and all of your naval assets are now moving to sea power inland, the way that we've seen it used by CENTCOM over the last 6 weeks. So the sequencing makes perfect sense here. You came in on the element of surprise, on our terms, at our moment of choosing, decapitation, command and control disrupted, get as much of the degradation of threat as you can out of the way using both air and sea power projection. And now, under cover of ceasefire, you're able to say, okay, I can divert these resources now. I can transit the Strait. The missiles aren't firing. The drones aren't going off. I can also now use my naval power to impose the blockade and focus on the mission on the water instead of the mission of projecting power into Iran itself and the defensive mission of the missile defense and counter-drone mission. That is not to say the Iranians at some point here couldn't escalate and return to firing missiles and return to firing drones, and then we will still have to do both, impose the blockade and provide the defenses for missile and drone offense from Iran, or to do something in the Red Sea, try to move naval assets around from the Gulf of Oman, move around over to the Red Sea area if the Houthis were to get in the game, or if they won't, since they haven't for all these weeks, and I suspect maybe they will not for other reasons. The Iranians start firing themselves with drones or anything towards the Red Sea. That could be another card they would play. But for now, so long as the president says, "Hey, I want to stay at the table. We're going to keep talking. This is what I want from you. I'm not doing the firing. I'm not conducting the major military operations. It's the Iranians now who would be prompting that. It's the Iranians who would be starting to fire."
And one more point, because we're not going to allow you to talk here, Michael, but just to build on Rich's point, right? The condition for negotiations, the condition for the ceasefire, was that the Strait would be open. And the Iranians, of course, blew that. Right? It wasn't happening, which was one of the reasons why they walked out, not the primary reason. And so that's how we find ourselves here right now with the U.S. doing what's required, right, to ensure that the Straits will be open.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm glad we seem to be moving into a more muscular position to negate what I believed was the unacceptable pressure that the Iranians had gained of late. And so I like that we're blockading Iranian ports. However, as far as the markets are concerned, Iran can still effectively close the Straits, correct? By merely threatening to hit one of the tankers as it goes through? Or do you think we've taken that card off the table?
I think this is a really interesting question. And I have been talking to folks in the oil industry, the shipping industry, every week since this all started. And, I go back to sort of kickoff +1, and everybody was saying we have an insurance issue. It's an insurance issue. Lloyd's has pulled the contracts. We just need insurance. And you saw DFC spin up and start offering, sovereign-backed insurance. And that didn't open anything up. And then people said, well, there's maritime notices from CENTCOM and from NAVCENT, don't cross here. It's an active war zone. And it basically became pretty clear that we were telling the shipping community, don't come in here right now. We're firing missiles. They're firing missiles. We don't want to be here trying to help you. We're trying to do a job ourselves. We then went into multiple weeks of trying to deny them the ability to mine the Strait and hunting for small boats and fast boats and with the A-10s and helicopters. And we've gotten to the point now where the shipping community says, okay, I understand that it's possible that you've degraded their threat quite a bit. You've laid waste to all their coastal defenses. They may not be able to reach out and touch so easily. Maybe they still could, but you'd be in the air to provide counter-drone defense. You might be able to provide counter-missile defense. But, we're concerned that they did lay mines, and we don't want to get trapped there. We don't want them to get trapped there. We'll go through when we see you go through. When the Navy thinks it's safe enough to go through, then we might follow.
But isn't that different? Isn't that different? I mean, they might be afraid to hit the U.S. Navy and not afraid to hit a tanker.
Well, so I think this goes back to your first question, which is, are we prepared to provide convoy escorts at this point? And we're currently, if you read CENTCOM's notice of what we are doing, why did the two destroyers cross? We are establishing the passageway. We're establishing the path for commercial shipping to follow. This is a safe road. You can go through it. We've done it. Stick to these coordinates. You'll be fine. That's the first piece of the message. But there will need to be an answer to what your question, which is, what happens if a drone comes? What happens if a missile comes?
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, I mean, President Trump is clearly signaling that he wants these companies to do this, right? So he hadn't been doing that for some time. Posting 34 ships went through yesterday. I'm not sure the nature of those ships and what they support they had, what security guarantees they got. But it would seem to me that President Trump is referencing them. It wasn't the sorts of vessels that were paying the Iranians to get through. So I think the expectation at this point is, there's a ceasefire. We have a lane that you don't have to worry about mines, and it doesn't have to go through Iran to get through.
Okay.
Last point, Michael. I will never let you keep talking. I think that's clear in this podcast.
That's why I do too.
But last point is, we have escalation ladder room in this maneuver. So because we have stopped the offensive firing on Iran and have proclaimed our own unilateral, supposedly a bilateral agreement, but it's really almost a unilateral ceasefire at this point, but since they didn't keep their end of the bargain. But we're continuing to hold to the ceasefire terms on our side. And now we have this blockade, which is not necessarily firing a single shot if you don't have to. If the Iranians were to break ceasefire and to fire on a tanker or fire on the Gulf anywhere, I would hope we have communicated to them in Islamabad or through other channels, we are prepared to follow through on the list that the president was already threatening with you before the ceasefire. We have not hit refineries in Iran. We have not hit Karg Island on the actual oil facility, export facility, or the power plant to turn it on. We have not hit the toll booth operators on Rock Island, which is sort of nuts to me to begin with. So there's a whole bunch of different things inside of Iran that we can still hit on the infrastructure side to cause them economic pain. They know that. It may have been a motivating factor to get to Islamabad. Certainly we are being led to believe that by the administration. So those cards are still on the table, and the Trump regime should know that.
Okay, so we're going to, in a few minutes, rewind to the road to Pakistan and then talk about the prospects for negotiations in the future. But a couple more questions about the state of play. So let's imagine the Iranians are unhappy, of course, with what the United States is doing now. Do we foresee them continuing or ramping up their strikes at energy infrastructure in the Gulf? In particular, it seems the UAE gets the brunt of the force. Rich, go ahead.
Well, I think this is a decision for the Trump regime how they want to escalate in response to the blockade. So if I were them, what are your option sets? That may be a better way of asking it. What could they do right now in response to this? First, easiest thing, test the blockade. See if we actually have the capacity to enforce it. Do we actually, put put our sirens on and pull over a VLCC and say, we're boarding you, come over here? Or do they get, past us and we're not actually prepared to chase somebody into the Indian Ocean? Remember in Venezuela, when we were doing this to Maduro, we actually had to chase VLCCs all the way into somewhere, on the other side of the Atlantic. It went on for a long time, as I recall, one of the ones that we were chasing. It's not obvious that you just get something. Now, this is a more narrower area, perhaps, and you'll be able to run somebody down, fairly quickly. But that would be number one. So test the blockade. Can we enforce it? Okay, we enforce it. We have a high-profile arresting of a VLCC. My recommendation would be don't focus on small, fuel smugglers and this or that. Focus on one big 2 million barrel laden ghost tanker that's on its way somewhere, maybe China, and say you're not coming through.
Hey,
we're boarding
Rich,
you.
I think they may have done that today. I mean, I think we may be there already. I saw some reporting that a Chinese vessel, a vessel they believed to be heading to China, was turned around. So it could be that this first sort of step is already played out, and
well,
the
that'd be
blockade
great.
is held
Just
up.
market deterrence, just like, hey, don't come, don't try it. That at some point somebody will try it, or somebody will be coming on the inbound side and be told, hey, we're boarding you, and then turn around and try to run away. I think that actually is what happened in the Venezuela context. The other piece then is, okay, yes, I could escalate with just turning back on what I was doing before the ceasefire. I could say, well, you're denying me my oil. Well, then I'm going to go after Saudi oil, and I'm going to go after... Now, what we saw them do, even during the ceasefire, they've denied it, but it's pretty obvious it's them. It's not the Houthis. Is they have attacked the East-West pipeline that runs the 7 million barrels per day from the Persian Gulf side of Saudi Arabia over to the Red Sea at Yanbu. And that took off about 500,000 barrels per day for a day or so. But, the Saudis are pretty good at repair, and they got this back up and running, they claim, back to max capacity already. They could just start targeting, in much more focused effort just on the pipeline if they want. They could, try to send drones and missiles just at Yanbu. Certainly if they can reach Israel, they can reach Yanbu. They haven't done that yet, but that would obviously create additional problems for the West if they were to do that. I come back to the fact that if they want to escalate in a kinetic way, they have to expect we are going to escalate in a kinetic way. And by the way, maybe the Saudis actually join this time. Maybe the Emiratis join this time. They'll face everybody. And they also know that the Israelis probably have targets on the internal repression side that they're not finished with. And a lot of the negotiators might not be around to negotiate anymore after they escalate in that way.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Rich Goldberg and Roger Zakheim.
Beacon Global Strategies is the premier national security advisory firm. Beacon works side by side with leading companies to help them understand national security policy, geopolitical risk, global technology policy, and federal procurement trends. Beacon's insight gives business leaders the decision advantage. Founded in 2013, Beacon develops and supports the execution of bespoke strategies to mitigate business risk, drive growth, and navigate a complex geopolitical environment. With a bipartisan team and decades of experience, Beacon provides a global perspective to help clients tackle their toughest challenges.
Roger, talk a little bit about whether the allies have any capability to contribute anyway. I mean, I'm all for the allies helping, but I feel like I get a lot of skepticism when I talk to uniformed military people, sort of off camera, off the record. They say there's not much they can do here. Maybe there's some minesweeping. Maybe there's some presence and monitoring later, but they're not going to transit the straits there with us or escort anyway. First of all, just from a military capability standpoint, and then just your sort of political read on it.
Yeah, I think they definitely have minesweeping capability, demining capacity that we lack. I think that's been the frustration of the president. That wasn't made available, wasn't offered to us, and driving a lot of the vitriol regarding our NATO allies. Let's be clear. I take your question, be referencing our NATO allies, right?
And then talk about UAE.
And then I think also to carry out, if we get to the point where we have to escort ships through vessels through the Strait, then we need more capacity there, and that's something that I think our own Navy has said that we would need others to help us do that. So I think those are two concrete areas where, from a military sort of operational standpoint, we could use the help. And I'd say, just kind of commentary wise, this is a huge missed opportunity. This is a really bad look. I mean, one Europe expert told me, who doesn't sort of lean, sort of obviously they support everything that the Trump administration does, more of an umpire than somebody swinging for the Trump administration, is like, listen, this is what alliances are for. You can go ahead and have all your summits where you kind of just, speak bad about each other when you come out in the press release and the statement. But when you're allies in armed conflict, and that's what this is, that's when you need to step up, and it hasn't happened at all, and it continues to be that way. I mean, reporting today, we have the UK and France are going to have a conference, I believe, is what they're calling it, to address these things. So it is pathetic. It's the sort of thing where there will be repercussions. The Europeans are already saying the repercussions are, well, we're going to have to figure out security going forward without the United States. But I think more consequential for them is that the U.S. We'll look elsewhere. In terms of the Gulf,
you're not worried that it's something like make work or just symbolic. You think there's actually beyond minesweeping. There's actually something.
As I understand, there's a capacity issue where if we're going to get into escorting commercial vessels, we need more. We need more help. We need support.
Why are we pretending like this didn't just happen during the Biden administration? This is what I don't understand. Like we didn't have an international coalition with all of these allies who sent naval assets to do escort missions for several months. Oh, that's right. We did it in the Red Sea.
Yeah, right.
We did it because of the Houthi threat. Where are all those countries? All their ministries of defense just threw away all the paperwork of what happened, all the after-action reports. They have no idea how to conduct this again. I mean, it's crazy. Of course they can.
Even the allies haven't stated that somehow this is something they're not capable of doing. It's something they don't want to do. That's the key distinction. And just Great one more point. I want to, we're talking about a number of our more capable NATO allies, Germany, France, the UK. There are other NATO allies that are stellar, that have been with us, that would support us, and of course, generally they are on the eastern side of the NATO alliance, and they're the ones that stare at Russia every day, and they want to be with us. So it's clearly not a NATO mission, but it's a mission that NATO allies should be a part of.
So I agree, and I think it's incumbent upon people to continually pound the table on. We're disappointed in our Western European allies, not NATO necessarily as a whole, because we have a lot of great contributors in Central and Eastern Europe. Roger, let me take you to the negotiations, and then we'll go to Rich. Were you surprised that we agreed to go to Islamabad over this weekend? Because I'll confess, I thought Trump probably wished he hadn't have said that he was going to blow up economic infrastructure targets. Then I wondered whether he regretted saying he would obliterate the civilization. But I thought that he was getting dangerously close to what some people call Taco Trump, where he was going to chicken out. And I thought at the very least he was going to have to hit a power plant or two or a bridge or two to demonstrate that he was serious. And then he went in the opposite direction and agreed to talks. Were you surprised? And then we're going to get into what we think was really discussed in Islamabad.
Well, it's kind of easy for me to say, no, I wasn't surprised, right?
Yeah, but you're an honest guy. But you're an honest guy.
I didn't like it. I'll put it that way. I didn't like it. But I have felt overall that we got into this whole President Trump entered this realm of taking out these, the energy infrastructure and these other targets, because you recall there was a moment where he was being backed in the corner where you've taken out all of the, the Navy and their missile inventory and you're taking out their launchers, and it was like, and it's not working. They're still firing. So Trump's like, "Are you kidding? I have more on my target list. I can go even, the escalatory ladder, knows no bounds almost." Not that he was ever going to go there, but he's so good at improvising that he immediately got out of the corner, and the Iranians were on the ropes with that. Okay? But to me, that was always sort of a way that he was sort of creating a framework for negotiation, right? I have this ladder, right? I can go and take after the energy targets unless you submit to my 15 points. But all the while that's happening, our military is still doing the day-to-day work of taking out what are the essential objectives of Operation Epic Fury. If you look at the original list, I see Rich nodding here, so I'll wrap up. If you look at the original list of what Operation Epic Fury was about, it wasn't about energy infrastructure.
Yeah.
It was about those things we talked about. And here I will say the brilliance of Trump's improvisation was he got the whole world focused on whether or not he's going to obliterate a civilization or take out these energy infrastructure targets, and they completely sort of were distracted away from the actual missions that we were carrying out that reflected the original objectives for Operation Epic Fury. I also happen to think that those 21 hours that were spent in Islamabad, and I'll wrap up with this. I mean, it was great. You took the one person in the administration that everybody seems to agree was sort of the least enthusiastic about the military operation. He said, you know what? Have at him. Go give peace a chance, right? And even Vice President J.D. Vance couldn't come out with an agreement because this regime is incapable of agreeing to the terms that even J.D. Vance wants. And what happened there is that politically he has his full cabinet behind him, the party behind him, exposed the Iranian regime for what it was, allowing for the moment we're in right now.
So, Rich, were you surprised at the energy feint and then to go to Islamabad? And you've got great sources. Tell us what you think was actually occurring during those 21 hours. What were we really discussing?
I was not that surprised by the decision not to go through on the targeting and to go to Islamabad. I thought that the threat on destroying a civilization was almost so over the top, even for the president, that it likely meant that there was something coming in the end. Now, I'm sure the counterpoint would be it was so over the top that they had to, prove the crazy man theory and get the message across through the Pakistanis. He's really going to do it. It's going to happen. You have to agree to his terms. Either could be correct, but I sort of saw the writing on the wall. There was this report that one of the X posts put out by the Prime Minister of Pakistan before there was a declared ceasefire.
I knew we were caving as soon as I saw that tweet.
And supposedly there was a draft. It was an edited. You can follow the drafts, and perhaps the first accidental post, said draft message from Pakistan, with the headline, which means the White House wrote it for them, saying, okay, put this.
I knew it.
So it did seem rather roadmapped of how to get to a point where everybody would say, okay, we'll go to ceasefire. I mean, clearly the Rump regime unfortunately, a lot of Americans, even the most best intentioned Americans, can never quite understand that they do not think like us. They will never think like us. I mean, their perception of reality is completely warped. Their perception of success and strength and leverage is completely not what a regular American's perception would be. And so that's how you get in. And then you combine in their own disinformation, what they have to tell their own people about why they're going to talks, how you create more pressure to create even more concessions after you've agreed to go to talks. I think about Lebanon and Israel and this, Lebanon was part of it. Oh, Israel has to stop firing on Hezbollah. And the president being like, no, they don't. And so all of this together, it doesn't surprise me that we went. I sort of expected earlier in the day this. I think the odds are increasing that we're going to have some sort of a ceasefire. That doesn't mean that the ceasefire didn't have multiple intentions to it. That didn't mean that there wasn't a deliberate strategy of what you could do under cover of ceasefire, like make a transit through the Strait of Hormuz and begin the preparations for this mission. that is not to say that we were not well-intentioned, that the vice president, that Witkoff and Kushner were not seriously negotiating. It serves a dual purpose. The president likes to have multiple options running at the same time. He likes to have multiple contingencies all available, have the decision tree always there where he's not trapped in one or the other.
The freedom of navigation operation on the day that we were meeting them. That was great.
It made perfect sense. But again, I'll go back to Roger, and this is tied to the talks, it's tied to the whole way this works out. At some point, you keep asking Admiral Cooper, have you hit everything that you came in to hit or that are capable of hitting via air and sea? And he has to come back at some point and say, I've pretty much exhausted the target set. We've reattacked, we've done this or that. The missile cities we can take out via B-2 bombers, we've taken out. Those that we have not been able to take out are still there with missiles inside them. You can't do anything further from the air, from the sea. But everything else checks out. You talk to the Israelis. Have you hit everything else that you wanted to hit? So what's left? It's the enriched uranium that perhaps there is a ground plan for, but we haven't seen it yet. It'd be a lot easier for them to just turn it over. There's a facility that still needs to get dismantled, Pickaxe Mountain, that was never hit. Perhaps we need to be on the ground to do that. That's the assessment, perhaps. And the Strait of Hormuz. Well, it's a lot better. You have a lot more options set to start reloading, bring back your options, have the Iranians stop firing, do things, freedom of navigation, consider a blockade, reset the force from a rescue mission also, by the way. We had a big rescue mission that was unexpected, exposed a landing site that was pretty, obviously perhaps prepared for a different mission near Isfahan. That might take reset as well. So this is all providing time.
Okay, so we've got just another, 10 minutes left. And Barack Ravid has reported today basically that, some of the substance, which was, look, we need you to cease uranium enrichment for the next 10 years, and you need to turn over or at least downblend this HEU that you're talking about. If it's accessible, it's 60% HEU, 440 kilograms. So, briefly talk about this. Rich, real quick, then Roger.
So I saw the report. It doesn't completely comport with what the president says publicly, that he is for zero enrichment. He wants all the nuclear dust, as he calls it, which is the 400-kilogram stockpile of HEU out of the country. By the way, there's presumably also other levels of enriched uranium also down there. We focus on one particular stockpile of HEU. There's also probably low enriched uranium stockpiles as well that we'd want to clear out all the enriched uranium material that they have. But I'm not really sure what a 20-year moratorium on enrichment is when we've destroyed their enrichment facilities, and part of the deal would be full dismantlement of all remaining remnant enrichment capabilities. So, unlike the JCPOA, which was, yes, there was a sunset, 15 years until this deal expires, they were allowed to keep all of their enrichment capabilities. They were allowed to do R&D on centrifuges. They had Fordo open. They had Natanz open. They were able to enrich at low levels, over time until the cap started coming off. We've already destroyed Natanz. We've rendered Fordo inoperable. We've now hit their entire industrial-based supply chain for the nuclear program. The uranium conversion facility was hit last year. Uranium metal production has been hit. I mean, we've laid waste to the nuclear program, with the exception of a couple remaining items. Not to minimize them, but what are you supposed to do in a 20-year moratorium when you can't enrich anyways? What does that even mean?
All right, Roger, what's your take on that and or anything else that was discussed? And then if you could just begin to preview, the president said that the Iranians have already tried to get in touch with us. They've already called since we arrived home. And what do you make of that? And do you think we're sincerely trying to reach our own JCPOA or multi-year agreement with Iran?
I mean, Rich and I were kibitzing about this before the start. I mean, it did sound like a JCPOA to me, although Rich highlights the important difference, right? But the idea that you would contemplate them having anything, it certainly stands apart from what the president has been saying repeatedly. I mean, it's the argument, the rationale for, quote, pulling out of the negotiations. Although, recognize the president is still talking about we're in this 21-day window. So even though we're not negotiating, this period of time where the Iranians have to give in to our demands, the clock is still ticking on that front. And I'm not sure what what that target list is that the president keeps on referencing. It could be the energy targets that we were referencing earlier. But to me, it's at the very least where we're going to go ahead and open the straits by force. I think that's what's left to do.
We got to do that. Okay, real quick here. What do you think, Rich? We're seeing what's going on behind the scenes right now. Are the Iranians really reaching out? Are there earnest negotiations ongoing? And do you think we're going to get back together soon?
I would figure we could see another round of talks. I would imagine, the propaganda that you saw from the Iranian side was, we couldn't do business with Vance. He couldn't make decisions. He wasn't the decision maker. He had to keep checking in with Trump. We need decision makers there. When the truth is that's a little bit of projection, or a lot of projection, because the people who were there couldn't make a decision while in Islamabad. They had to just draw out what their plan was and then leave Islamabad. They have to go back. There are people from the Rump regime who weren't there, and they don't want to call them when they're in Islamabad, because then the Israelis will figure out where he's sitting and go kill him potentially. So Vahidi and others who are still back in Tehran, who are going behind the magic curtain and pretending, it's Weekend at Khomeini, by the way. That's Weekend at Bernie fans out there. Like there's some vegetable behind the curtain who's supposedly the supreme leader who's authorized all this. You can't see him, you can't hear him, he may not even exist, but there are somebody who's giving orders saying, I've gone behind the curtain and this is what he had to say. You can't even talk to the guy who goes behind the curtain without flying back to Tehran. Yeah. So I assume they're talking now. One other point, the bombs just stopped dropping for the first time during the ceasefire. Probably the first time that they've been able to actually get a hold of people, have a meeting, talk about what has happened, and get a full picture of the battle damage. I don't think the regime probably even understood what happened to them until now.
Roger, what do you think?
I was just going to make one last point. Rich, you're spot on in talking about, hey, the command and control here is perhaps better than maybe we would have expected, right? That the regime has this discipline to stop firing that we've seen with the ceasefire. But at the same time, the communication here has got to be more difficult. So that's one thing going on. I do think overall negotiations or sort of the appearance of negotiations really helps President Trump, helps the U.S. position here. Because what we're trying to do is to open up the straits and build muscle memory and get all of the commercial shipping. If there are 34 ships transited yesterday, how many will transit, as of Monday, the day of this recording? What does that look like? And at that point, that's working to the benefit, of the U.S. interest, the U.S. economy. And at that point, you're sort of creating a status quo where President Trump very well could say, listen, I got enough militarily, and now the Strait of Hormuz is operating without people having to go through Iran and paying their tolls. I mean, that could be the sort of the reality he wants to build while we have this appearance of negotiation and ceasefire.
Roger, Rich, that's all the time we have. Thanks so much for joining NatSec Matters. We'd love to have you back.
That was Rich Goldberg and Roger Zakheim. Join us next week for another edition of NatSec Matters.
NatSec Matters is produced by Steve Dorsey with assistance from Ashley Berry. NatSec Matters is a production of Beacon Global Strategies.